with the NBA trade deadline approaching very, very quick, and a lot of trades will likely be occurring over these coming weeks, but will the Bulls try to make a trade in these coming weeks? And if so, who should they target? That's what I'm going to cover in today's video. The 4 potential options for the Bulls to move and go target during this trade deadline. So if you enjoy this content, please like and subscribe. It truly means the world to me. But let's not waste any more of your time. Let's go and get right into things. As we all know, the Bulls are currently sitting right on the verge of the playoffs. And depending on how this trade deadline occurs, this team could go for a guaranteed spot in the playoffs, potentially jumping to a top 6 if the right trades are to occur and this team is able to figure it out down the stretch, or fall out of playoff chances and end up with a lottery pick. A lot could all transpire due to these coming weeks, so I think it's really important that we kind of pay attention to this. Now, the first thing I want to cover is what the Bulls should be targeting. Not a player, but kind of what they need to improve this team. Now, as we all know, the 2 biggest things that the Bulls have struggled with are defense and three-point shooting, and I do think you could kind of target both with a guard or a forward of some sort with a 3-and-D player, or you could go at it and get 2 separate trades. So obviously a 3-point shooter that gets you a decent amount of volume with a high shooting percentage. This Bulls team is top 10 in shooting percentage, but last in the entire league in attempts per game. So if you can get a guy that's going to give you more attempts and keep that percentage really high, I think that's going to turn into more winning games. Along with that, bring in some more defensive help, whether that's getting steals or blocks or just preventing points. This team, although has some top-level defenders in Williams, Ayo, Caruso, and Lonzo when he returns, also has some struggling defensive guys. Zach and DeMar, I think, average about 1 steal per game, which is definitely improved compared to what we've seen in previous years for both of those guys throughout their career. But you could still help them out with some defensive presence. The center position doesn't have great defense. I mean, I think Vooch and Drummond are both, very serviceable, if not decent defenders, but you could definitely improve that. I think defense and three-point shooting is the target the Bulls should go after at this trade deadline. But who are some potential options? So, I'm not sure if the Bulls are going to make a move here. I think they definitely could, but I'm not so sure on it. So I got 2 players that the Bulls could target, and I have 2 players that the Bulls could move on from. I think it could really go both ways. It all depends on how the Bulls see everything playing out. Do they think they'll be able to break in and be a contender, or do they think that it's all going to, be time for a retool in the offseason? That's kind of how I look at this. So first, let's talk about some targets for the Bulls to go after. I want to talk about Eric Gordon first. Maybe not the flashiest name, but a name I have seen attached to the Bulls and what I think would work very, very well, and could honestly be a little bit easier of a trade, a little bit lighter of a trade, whether that's draft picks or a younger player. Eric Gordon is by far the oldest on the team and completely out of the timeline for the Rockets. So Eric Gordon could be a piece that, just a second-round pick could be enough to get him on your team. And he improves both defense and shooting for this team. On defense, he averages 1.1 steal blocks per game. I do like to combine those 2 stats. I think it works a little bit better as a whole defensively to look at it that way. And 1.1 steal blocks per game would mean an improvement over Goran Dragic as well as Kobe White. I do think Kobe White has improved this year, but I still think that Eric Gordon could be a better option. He also brings some better consistency to your 3-point shooting. Now, the difference with this Bulls team, how it sits now, and what Eric Gordon could bring, is there's a lot of guys that get on hot streaks. Zach LaVine, Kobe White, all these guys can get on hot streaks and get really, really good, percentage shooting, but they can also go on the other side and get really cold and have struggles even hitting 1 3-point per game for a good stretch of time. And I think Eric Gordon, what he can bring to this team is consistency through and through. He's going to get you around that 30 to 40 range every single game, no matter how many shots he's putting up. That's something that the Bulls really could use and could be the difference in winning some of these games. This year, he is a 35% three-point shooter, which is one of the best on this Bulls roster. If you put him onto the Bulls roster, I think that would place him at either second or third. I'm not exactly sure where he'd land. Patrick Williams is first, and I think Caruso and Zach. I'm not sure if 35 is above Zach and them or not. But 35 is definitely a really, really good shooter, and he does that consistency no matter how many shots he's putting up. Also averages 12 points per game, but that's not a ton. But he's a bench piece. You're not expecting him to be a starter, so you get 12 from somebody off the bench that's a consistent shooter and brings a good level of defense. I think for a second rounder or whatever you trade him for, is definitely worth looking into at the least. And he could be a good piece to come off the bench to get you some, 3-point shots up, or you could slide him into, as the game progresses, not as an actual starter, but as the game progresses, get a couple of the starters out there and Eric Gordon. Then they got to look at Eric Gordon to kind of close out on him so he can get easy 3-point shots. That could lead to easy shots for, Vooch. There won't be so many people in the paint. Easy shots for Zach, who's an incredible 3-point shooter, as well as Patrick Williams, and DeMar could get a little bit easier mid-ranges as people are pulled out towards Eric Gordon. I think that's a pretty good option right there. And like I said, I think it could be an easy trade that could occur. Something very, very light that wouldn't directly impact the now or the future of the Bulls on like a player or a draft pick that is necessary. I think Eric Gordon could be a good option and might even be the most likely option out of all these guys. Now, the next person here that the Bulls could trade for is going to be Kyle Kuzma. I think this is a little bit flashier of an option. Of course, he's on the Wizards right now, who I think are like the 11th or 12th seed, and right behind the Bulls, who are, just barely ahead of them by a few games. Kuzma is a little bit different of a story. The Wizards are in a spot where it's, almost time for them to rebuild. If they miss the playoffs here, I definitely think they're going to try to move some pieces out and get ready for a rebuild. I don't know if Bradley Beal is going to be willing to stay or not. That's going to be a huge factor. But, Kyle Kuzma could bring a huge piece to this Bulls offense as well as defense. At 6'9", with, some really good athleticism, he could almost play and guard 1 through 5, at least 1 through 4. I think that works pretty well. I don't think he's going to be playing your point guard ever, nor your shooting guard, but he could definitely guard 3 through 5 and could likely play 3 through 5 in the Bulls. Other teams, maybe he could play a few more positions, but I think his versatility, his ability, all works really, really well. Now, the one key with Kyle Kuzma's potential trade would be how much you have to put in. I'm not really sure. It all depends on if the Wizards are looking at rebuild or if they still think they can be contenders. If they think they're going to be contenders, that likely means a guy like DeMar DeRozan or Vooch. How do you feel about that? I'm not so sure. I'd really like to see both of those guys stay on this roster. But if the Wizards think that it's time to, prepare for a rebuild, maybe the Bulls do a little bit of what they did with Vooch a couple years back at the trade deadline and throw some picks in to improve the team right now. And I think that could work out. Like I said, 6'9", that brings you enough, of just pure, the body, the size of all that to be at least some sort of impact on defense. I think Kuzma is a right about average, maybe even above average defender. Maybe I'm wrong in saying that, but he brings a good amount to the team. He also brings some, a little bit of almost veteran experience. I wouldn't say quite to the age of being called a veteran, but brings something to this team that has plenty of younger guys still on the roster that could learn from Kuzma as well as the rest of the guys on this team, in DeMar and in Vooch. And you bring some familiarity to Lonzo Ball. Of course, Lonzo Ball and Kyle Kuzma were on the Lakers at one time. This could be good for Lonzo as he returns from his injury to not only have the guys that he played with for the Bulls last year, but also a guy that he played with previously. That could be something good to work in. But he also brings, Kyle Kuzma brings some 3-point shot ability and a good amount of defense and scoring as a whole. 46% field goal, pretty close to 50, and 34% from 3. That's a pretty good number, especially from a guy that's going to be running your forward position most likely. 34%, really, really good, especially when Patrick Williams is also averaging 41. That's a really, really good pairing for this team. He also brings in 7.6 rebounds, 1 block steal per game, and 22 points per game. That would, bring him into the top of this Bulls team. I think only, at this current moment, only Zach and Vooch are Zach and DeMar are 20 points per game on this team. I think Vooch is just slightly outside of that. You make it 3 20-plus point per game players on this team and Vooch, as well as a good amount of defenders and a good bench. this could be a huge part. Now, of course, it's going to be a difference of do they want DeMar or do they want picks? Because how I'm looking at it, it could be a really, really difficult trade with Washington no matter what they want, DeMar or picks. They might ask a little too much and the Bulls might not be willing to, and I would respect that. Because I could see, Kuzma, a young guy who is showing that he has talent, averaging his highest points per game in 22 points. I could see them asking, a good chunk of change to get a guy like Kyle Kuzma. So this might be a little bit further out there, but, you bring in him, and whether you're trading, like a couple draft picks in Kobe or DeMar, I'm not quite sure, but could be a decent option and could even propel the Bulls into a top 10 offense once you add Kuzma. How I look at it, the best option here is if you trade Kuzma with some picks, and yes, I'm willing to dispel picks because I think the Bulls are pretty much in a win-now situation. I don't think they're ready to enter that, time for a bunch of draft picks, so I'm okay with throwing some picks. Maybe some picks and Kobe White, and you keep DeMar and the rest of these guys. And how I look at it, your starting lineup would be, when healthy, Lonzo Ball or Ayo Dosunmu. Your shooting guard, of course, would be Zach LaVine. Your small forward would be DeMar DeRozan. Your power forward would be Kuzma. And Patrick Williams would go to the bench. Now, I am a big fan of Patrick Williams, but I do think it might help him a little bit to be on the bench and learn from a guy above him. And then Vooch would be your 5. And I do think Patrick Williams could definitely get some time with the starters as the game goes on, but he would be a really good addition defensively on the bench, and I think he has enough scoring where you take him off the starting lineup that has a ton of scores already. He could get you some points off the bench. I think that could work really, really well for this team. I think that would be a great starting lineup, but I do worry how much you'd have to pitch in for that. Now that we've covered some potential trade targets for the Bulls, we should talk about some potential pieces that the Bulls could move out on this trade deadline. Some players that they maybe don't longer need or want on this roster. Now, the first player I want to talk about is trading away Kobe White. Now, Kobe White has been with this team for quite some time now and is still currently on his rookie deal and does become a restricted free agent after this year, which could be a key piece on why they may be willing to move on from Kobe White. Now, he certainly hasn't reached the expectations that we all had when he was a lottery pick for the Bulls a couple years back, but I still think he has a lot to show, and I think he could be a good player that maybe does it really good on a different team like we saw with Lauri Markkanen this past year. Now, although he definitely has improved this year and has, been a good piece for this Bulls team, was a top points per game last year and has been pretty decent this year, I just don't really know where he fits in on this roster anymore versus what you could bring in to work with this roster. Now, Kobe White, yes, he is one of the best, three-point shooters on this team, but he's a streaky player, which is exactly what the Bulls kind of need to move away from. He's a young guy, which of course is good for long-term success, but he's also in a loaded guard position. This Bulls team has so many players in that guard spot that deserve minutes. It's really, really hard for Kobe White to get the minutes he deserves without taking away from some potential minutes from other players. I mean, you have Alex Caruso, you have Ayo Dosunmu, you have, Goran Dragic, you have Dalen Terry if he progresses, of course, and, when Lonzo Ball returns, you're going to have Lonzo Ball right there. You have a ton of players in this guard position that need minutes, and then you have Kobe White. And you have to think about, do you want to extend him? And if you don't, is he worth trying to get something out of now, or do you keep him for the playoff push? And I think I'm almost leaning towards the former, getting something out of him now, because I don't think the Bulls are going to be able to, one, retain his rights, or get the return out of it that I think they really, really need. Now, Kobe, what is he worth? I don't think he's worth a first-round draft pick. I just don't. Unless it's to a team that is going to get a late-round first. It's pretty much just a second-rounder and is a contending team that needs three-point shooting. There's a couple options there that you could go with, but, that's pretty much the only way I see a first-round draft pick for Kobe White, if the Bulls are to be targeting draft picks, that is. I kind of lean towards the possibility of 2 second-rounders. I think that's perfectly fine. I think that would be reasonable to say 2 first-rounders for Kobe White and, maybe a veteran player. Of course, you look back here, Eric Gordon potentially could be an option. Maybe you trade Kobe White for Eric Gordon and a couple draft picks. I think that could work out very, very well for both sides. A young team with the Rockets, Kobe White would fit just in, perfectly fine. And Eric Gordon comes to the Bulls, gets you your three-point shooting that's better than Kobe, and also you don't have to worry about that extension that's coming up and a big-time potential cap hit because of that. So, I think Kobe White has a lot for him, and I was a big fan of him when he got drafted. Of course, I am a UNC fan. I enjoyed watching him when he was with that team, but he just never really meshed well with this Bulls team and met his full potential. I think he might have better luck on a different team, but I just see what you could get for Kobe White versus what he can bring to this team this last half year, or if you extend him, I think it might be worth it to move him out. And I think it honestly could be decently likely. He's been in a lot of trade talks through the years and seemingly still is in many. I think potential trading away Kobe White could be an option right here. And lastly, talking about trading away a player, and this one's definitely a risky one. I know some people are throwing out a ton of names. People are throwing out Zach LaVine. People are throwing out Vooch, Patrick Williams. I mean, almost every name on this team has been talked about trading away, but I'm going to say potentially trading away DeMar DeRozan. Now, I did make a whole video on this already. Feel free to check that out. But I like DeMar. DeMar has brought a bunch to this team, and I'm a big fan of DeMar, and honestly, I'd rather keep him on this team, but it's hard not to look at the option of trading him away. I mean, you got to look at it because what he potentially could bring back and his aging. He's getting older, and although he's been performing well above his age, he's getting older, and at some point his progression is going to come down. So, trading away DeMar could be an option. Now, I'm not a big fan of it, but it could be an option nonetheless, so let's talk about that real quick. DeMar DeRozan, of course, I think like 34 years old, maybe somewhere around there, is a guy that's been performing at a top level, likely an all-star again this year, first team All-NBA last year. He has been great for the Bulls team, and honestly has quickly become a fan favorite and maybe even a Bulls legend. If he is to stay on this team and keep up at this level, he definitely could become a Bulls legend. Similar to, not the level of like Rodman, Pippen, and Jordan, but similar to the level of like D. Rose and players like that where, Joakim Noah, where everyone just kind of cheers for them. They're happy for the time that they had with him, and they really appreciate it, but maybe don't get their numbers retired. I think that's where DeMar DeRozan could potentially land. He's brought a lot to this team, but he could also bring a lot back in a trade option. Like I said, I'm a big fan of what he was able to do for the Bulls, but we got to look at the option right here, okay? Either he goes to a team that is a contender or wants to be a contender, and you get some draft picks, most likely out of that scenario. That's kind of how that sits, some draft picks or a player that's not very important. You're likely not going to see a team that thinks they're a contender trade player for player that is worth one another. I mean, you're not going to see something big time like that. But potential draft picks, maybe you get your first back that you trade away from Vooch. Some options there could be, potential, or you trade him to a lower level team that's in the play-in range that, once again, could be draft picks. Potentially the Lakers. There's always been rumbling about DeMar and the Lakers nonstop since he joined the Bulls. Maybe you get one or two first-round picks for DeMar DeRozan, 2027, 2029. Those could be worth a lot from a Lakers team. Whether you use them for a draft pick yourself or trade them away could be worth a lot. And maybe you get a player in return for that. Russell Westbrook's been definitely linked to the Bulls a lot. Or, maybe a different team that's in a similar position to the Lakers where you get a first-round draft pick and a player that either isn't quite reaching expectations or you just have to match the contract. That's kind of how I see DeMar. Now, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of the potential option of trading him away, but you definitely have to look at it. So those are the 4 potential trades that I'd see the Bulls targeting. Quickly, cover these again. Eric Gordon adds to your shooting and a little bit better defensively than Goran and Kobe. Kyle Kuzma, I think, could be a really, really good option to add to this team if you don't have to trade DeMar in the process, unless you are willing to kind of retool, maybe not be contending this year, but you think Kyle Kuzma brings long-term success. That's a potential option there as well. And then trading away Kobe White and potentially trading away DeMar DeRozan. I think those are the 4 most likely that I'm kind of leaning towards potentially happening. But what do you guys think? What trade do you want to occur? And do you think the Bulls will make any trades at all? If you enjoyed this content, please like, subscribe. It truly means the world to me. And as always, I hope it taught something. I hope it made you smile. I hope it made you laugh. Some really important to me. Affects most of the day in a great way. And as always, you guys all be safe out there.